When both you and the narcissist become silent, the world does not suddenly become peaceful. It explodes beneath the surface because, for the first time, someone is losing control, and this time it is not you. Most people assume that when both people stop talking, the story has reached its ending. The reality is much more disturbing. This is the point where the narcissist's real psychological struggle begins, while your true healing quietly takes shape. Stay with me because what happens next is the part almost nobody talks about. If these words already feel painfully familiar, keep watching. You need to understand the psychological ground you are walking across because this understanding is what helps you break the cycle for good. Let's go even deeper. The moment communication stops on both sides, the first process begins inside the narcissist's mind. It is a period of mental adjustment, quiet, invisible, and often completely missed because it happens behind the scenes long before they make another move. When you choose silence, you may see it as a boundary, a turning point, or the first real step toward peace. They do not see it that way. To them, your silence becomes information they need to study. They are not asking themselves how deeply they hurt you. They are trying to figure out why they are losing influence. Instead of reflecting on their actions, they search for hidden reasons behind yours. They ask themselves whether you are punishing them, whether someone else has your attention now, or whether you are trying to force them into reacting. Every unanswered message becomes a mystery they feel compelled to solve because uncertainty makes them deeply uncomfortable. Don't miss this part because everything starts making sense from here. During this quiet adjustment, they may not contact you at all. Their silence is not proof that they no longer care. It is often part of their calculation. They may quietly watch your online activity, pay attention to mutual friends, or notice who is interacting with you. Without saying a word, they gather information while waiting for your next emotional move. They usually believe that anyone they once controlled will eventually come back. Because of that belief, they rarely see your silence as the end. Instead, they assume it is only temporary resistance. That is why they often stay calm in the beginning. They expect you to reach out first because that has happened before. They trust the emotional habits they helped create inside you. They depend on your guilt, your fear of conflict, your desire to fix things, and your hope that peace can still be restored. They expect you to give in. But when you refuse to break the silence, something begins to change inside them. Their quiet observation becomes more intense. They slowly realize that their influence may not be as strong as they believed. That is when your silence begins to feel dangerous to them. In their world, silence is never just silence. It either becomes another chance to regain control or a growing threat to their ego. The longer you remain steady, the more unstable their sense of certainty becomes because your silence quietly changes the power balance they once depended on. Stay with this because the next stage explains why they often react in ways that seem completely unexpected. When silence continues, your emotional experience and theirs move in completely different directions. That difference reveals one of the hardest truths to accept. You carry the pain while they mostly notice the disruption. After stepping away, you often find yourself holding every piece of emotional damage left behind. You sort through broken trust, confusing memories, unanswered questions, and the mental exhaustion that built up over time. Sadness may appear, so may guilt, loneliness, or emotional withdrawal. You are grieving more than the relationship itself. You are grieving the version of yourself that accepted so much for so long. Your silence comes after reaching emotional overload. Your mind and body simply cannot survive more chaos. You are trying to reclaim your peace, your dignity, and your identity. That process affects everything. Your sleep changes. Your confidence feels shaken, old memories replay. Even your sense of who you are may feel uncertain. On the other side, they rarely experience your silence with the same emotional depth. They are not sitting alone thinking about how they hurt you or wondering what they should change. Their first response is usually much simpler. They notice the inconvenience. They became used to constant access to your attention, your reactions, your reassurance, your apologies, your care, and even your arguments. Every response from you reinforced their importance. When that flow suddenly stops, something they depended on disappears. It does not usually break them emotionally. It frustrates them. They experience it like losing access to something they expected to always be available. That difference changes everything, and what happens after this is where the real shift begins. Narcissists do not build their confidence from a deep sense of self-worth. Their confidence depends on what other people give them through attention, admiration, and emotional reactions. Their identity is held together by outside validation, and you were once an important part of that system. When you stop participating, that fragile structure begins to crack. As the days become weeks, your silence no longer feels like a small inconvenience to them. It starts to feel like a serious threat to the image they have of themselves. Inside, anxiety begins to rise, even if they hide it behind anger, arrogance, or complete emotional distance. They slowly realize that the old methods are no longer getting results. The guilt they used to place on your shoulders has nowhere to land. The subtle insults, the cold treatment, and the sudden disappearances that once pushed you into chasing them are now met with complete silence. That missing response creates something they struggle to handle. Their usual emotional cycle is broken. In healthy relationships, silence can create room for healing, reflection, and personal growth. But inside a toxic relationship, silence removes the emotional fuel they relied on. Their sense of stability depends on seeing themselves reflected through the reactions of others. When you stop providing that reflection, they are left facing an uncomfortable emptiness they spend their lives trying to avoid. Stay with me, because this is where the real shift begins. Instead of accepting responsibility for what happened, they search for another explanation that protects their self-image. They convince themselves that you are the one being unfair, that you are playing games, or that you never truly cared. Creating that story allows them to avoid facing the truth while keeping their ego intact. As those thoughts grow stronger, they often begin rewriting the past. They present themselves as the victim and describe you as the cold or uncaring person, leaving out the emotional damage they caused along the way. They may tell friends, family members, or anyone willing to listen a completely different version of the relationship. This is not always about convincing other people. It is also about convincing themselves. If enough people believe their version, they feel less pressure to confront reality. Sometimes this becomes a campaign to damage your reputation, hoping that the lies will eventually reach you. The goal is rarely just to talk about you. The real goal is to pull you back into the emotional cycle. They want you to defend yourself. They want you to explain. They want you to argue, cry, or prove them wrong, because every emotional reaction reminds them they still have influence over you. Even anger feeds the connection they are trying to restore. But when you refuse to respond, something very different happens. Their efforts fall into silence instead of conflict. That silence becomes something they cannot easily overcome. Without emotional reactions to feed on, they are left alone with their own thoughts and growing frustration. The wall you have built cannot be pulled down by arguments, because you are no longer standing on the other side trying to convince them of anything. While they continue searching for control, chasing attention, or looking for someone new to fill the empty space, you begin creating something much stronger. The silence that once felt painful slowly becomes a place of safety. It becomes the space where your confidence returns, your peace grows stronger, and your future starts taking shape. Don't miss what comes next, because this final piece explains why silence changes everything. Every emotion you showed, every reply you sent, and every time you returned after an argument served a purpose in their world. Each reaction confirmed that they still had influence over your feelings and your decisions. The moment you stop responding, that familiar pattern is broken. That interruption forces them into an uncomfortable moment of psychological exposure. It quietly reveals how much they depended on your involvement, even though they would never openly admit it. They built a story where they were always in charge, always making the decisions, and always holding the upper hand. Your silence challenges that story without saying a single word. It tells them that you may no longer accept the role they expected you to play, and that realization begins to shake the identity they worked so hard to protect. Without your responses, they have nothing left to push against. There is no argument to twist, no emotion to manipulate, and no reaction to use as proof that they still matter. That absence becomes deeply unsettling, not because they suddenly understand the value of the relationship, but because the system of control they depended on is no longer working. The foundation that supported their sense of importance begins to weaken, while the foundation of your own life quietly becomes stronger. That is why silence is so powerful. It does not need to fight. It does not need to explain. It simply removes the emotional fuel that kept the old cycle alive, allowing you to move forward while they struggle to understand why the past no longer has the same hold over you. This is the point where their inner world starts becoming restless. Their mind begins racing in circles. They replay old conversations, looking for clues they may have overlooked. They wonder whether someone else has entered your life or taken the place they once believed belonged to them. They begin thinking about different ways to regain control, even if they still have not contacted you. Your silence grows louder inside their mind than it ever does inside yours, because they no longer know what is happening in your life. They cannot see your thoughts, your emotions, or your next move. That uncertainty takes away the illusion that they can predict or influence your behavior. For the first time, they find themselves outside your world instead of standing at the center of it. That change is incredibly difficult for them to accept. Their emotions swing back and forth with surprising speed. One moment they feel confident and superior, the next they feel suspicious, anxious, and unsure. Certainty turns into confusion. Confidence turns into insecurity. All of this emotional chaos begins because of something incredibly simple: your absence. From the outside, it may appear as though nothing is happening at all. Two people are simply no longer speaking. But beneath the surface, their mind is working overtime, trying to rebuild the control they believe they have lost. Stay with me, because what happens next explains why silence often triggers some of their most predictable behaviors. As the silence continues, they often move through a familiar pattern of behaviors meant to restore their sense of power. One of the first responses is an attempt to fill the empty space your absence created. This usually appears through hoovering, baiting, or triangulation. These are not random actions or emotional decisions made in the moment. They are calculated responses that appear when they begin feeling their influence slipping away. Hoovering usually starts once they realize your silence is lasting much longer than expected. At first, they assume you will come back because that has happened before. They believe the habits they created inside you will eventually pull you back. But when you do not return, anxiety starts growing. Hoovering becomes their attempt to draw you back into the familiar cycle. It is rarely about genuine emotional connection. It is about restoring the control they believe belongs to them. They may send a kind message, remind you of a happy memory, apologize in ways they never have before, or suddenly act thoughtful and caring. They carefully adjust their approach based on what they believe is most likely to work. The purpose is not true change. The purpose is getting you emotionally involved again. If that approach fails or feels too risky for them, they often switch strategies. They move toward baiting. This tactic is designed to pull an emotional reaction out of you, no matter what kind of reaction it is. They may post something online hoping to trigger jealousy, send a cold or disrespectful message to make you angry, or create unnecessary drama that pressures you into responding. To them, positive or negative attention serves the same purpose. Both prove they can still affect your emotions. Don't look away now, because this next part ties everything together. When those efforts fail to break your silence, they often raise the stakes by bringing someone else into the situation. This is known as triangulation. They may involve a former partner, a new relationship, a close friend, or even a family member. The purpose is not to build a meaningful connection with that person. The purpose is to create a story that puts them back in a position of control. They might show off a new relationship, suggest that someone else appreciates them more than you ever did, or paint themselves as the victim while exaggerating your silence. Every move is meant to make you question yourself, feel replaced, or wonder whether you made the wrong decision. They hope those feelings will push you into proving your value or fighting for your place in their life again. None of these behaviors are evidence of love. They are signs of dependence on outside validation. Their sense of identity relies heavily on constant emotional input from other people. The moment you stop providing that energy, they rush to fill the empty space by any means available. Hoovering, baiting, and triangulation are not expressions of emotional closeness. They are attempts to recover psychological control after feeling it slip away. Every one of those reactions grows from fear, entitlement, and a wounded ego, all set into motion by your decision to remain silent. As the silence stretches on, something even more powerful begins to happen. While you slowly experience more peace, clarity, and emotional freedom, they experience increasing discomfort. Your quiet does not feel peaceful to them. It feels like losing control. Their identity depends on staying at the center of someone else's emotional world. Whether through admiration, conflict, attention, or constant drama, they need to feel emotionally significant. When you stop feeding that cycle, an inner alarm begins sounding inside them. What feels like healing for you feels like instability for them. That is the hidden power of silence. It removes the emotional fuel they relied on while giving you the space to rebuild the life they tried so hard to keep under their control. They do not know how to calm themselves without constant reactions from other people, and your silence removes the very feedback they depend on. That absence sets off a powerful psychological chain reaction. In the beginning, they often pretend your silence means nothing. They act as though they are completely fine. They may appear distant, unaffected, or even relieved that communication has stopped. But beneath that appearance is a carefully built defense. As the days pass, ignoring your silence becomes much more difficult. Without your attention supporting the image they have of themselves, they slowly begin feeling overlooked, unimportant, and invisible. Those emotions are almost impossible for them to tolerate because they strike at their deepest fear of being ordinary or insignificant. While you are using the silence to recover your strength and reconnect with yourself, they experience that same silence as an emotional emptiness that shakes the foundation of who they believe they are. Your nervous system slowly begins settling after living under constant stress and unpredictability. The emotional fog that surrounded you starts clearing away. Little by little, you recognize your value again. You recover the parts of yourself that had been buried beneath fear, confusion, and constant emotional pressure. You discover peace inside the quiet while they discover growing chaos. The longer the silence continues, the greater this difference becomes. They replay old conversations, imagine endless possibilities, and create stories about why you are no longer responding. The uncertainty follows them everywhere. What they truly miss is not the relationship itself. They miss seeing themselves reflected in your emotional reactions. Your silence becomes your healing, while their silence becomes their instability. You slowly recover your identity while they feel the version of themselves they carefully built beginning to fall apart. Stay with me, because this next part explains why your healing becomes stronger every single day. As the silence continues, something remarkable begins happening inside you. It may feel slow, at times it feels confusing, yet at the same time it brings an unexpected sense of relief. Your nervous system, which spent so much time preparing for the next argument, criticism, or emotional shock, finally receives an opportunity to rest. Living in a toxic relationship teaches your body to stay on constant alert. You become used to watching every word, predicting every mood, and preparing for emotional storms before they even arrive. Eventually, your body begins expecting tension even during peaceful moments. Because of that, silence does not immediately feel comforting. At first, it may actually feel uncomfortable. You may become restless, anxious, or strangely unsettled by the lack of conflict. You may even wonder if something is wrong simply because everything has become quiet. That reaction is not weakness. It is the natural response of a body that spent a long time surviving instead of living. But with every passing day, that emotional fog becomes lighter. Your thoughts grow clearer. You notice what life feels like when you are no longer waiting for someone else's anger, manipulation, or unpredictable behavior. Your sleep slowly improves. Moments of genuine peace begin returning. You experience stillness that may have been missing for years. Your mind and body begin adjusting to safety instead of chaos. This is where true healing quietly begins. It does not depend on an apology. It does not require closure. It does not wait for permission from the person who hurt you. It simply begins because you finally stepped away from the cycle. As the weeks become months, your silence changes into something far stronger than a simple boundary. It becomes a place that protects your peace. They may still try to reach over those boundaries from time to time. They might send indirect messages, use mutual friends to gather information, or quietly check whether they can still affect your emotions. But something inside you has changed. The words that once made your stomach tighten no longer carry the same weight. The confusion that once consumed your thoughts fades into the background. You no longer spend hours trying to understand their motives or predict what they will do next, because your attention has returned to the one person who truly needs it, you. The psychological puzzle that once controlled your life loses its hold because you are too busy rebuilding your own future. The silence has fulfilled its purpose. It has cut off the emotional supply they depended on while giving your own mind and heart the chance to recover. Then one day, you realize something that once seemed impossible. The explosion you feared was never the end of your life. It was the sound of the emotional chains finally breaking. What once felt terrifying became the doorway to your freedom. The world did not fall apart when both of you stopped talking. It simply made room for a new chapter where your peace no longer depends on someone else's approval, your happiness no longer depends on their behavior, and your future is no longer shaped by the control they once believed they would always have. And that is the greatest victory of all. It is not that they finally understood you. It is that you finally understood your own worth, walked away from the cycle, and never needed to look back again.